Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. You know, we talk about a lot of sports on here, a lot of adjacent topics, and one sport that has never really been brought up is golf. And there's a reason for that. I'm not super into golf, but something happened recently that piqued my interest that is golf adjacent and something that leads to a bigger conversation piece outside of the sport. So, Callaway, the well-known golf equipment manufacturer, clubs, balls, apparel, whatever, they had a little bit of a hot water moment when with a collaboration with another golf company called Good Golf, which is more of like a social media sort of phenomenon. They did a lot of skits and they've gotten really popular in the golf community online. And they had a co-branded driver, and they released this advertisement that intended to make a play on the horror movie phenomenon Obsession, which is a really good movie, uh, but abysmally executed it. So the premise of the commercial is they have this new driver. It's supposed to be super awesome. It's like $650. It's in the guy's golf bag. Actually, the co-founder of Good Goods golf bag, and a woman is going to grab the driver out of the golf bag. And then he sees this, and he bum rushes towards her, knocks her down, and grabs the club and says, "Not with my golf club," or "Don't grab my golf club," or whatever. And the full video has like the no 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 thing, which was again popularized during Obsession, but the skits totally missed the mark. And Ellen Briggs at Front Office Sports has been reporting on this a lot, and there's been a lot of backlash towards towards Callaway. Both companies have issued an apology. They removed the video, all the stuff you'd expect. But now Good has lost a lot of prominent retail space. Dick's Sporting Goods ended their partnership with them. Target took their stuff off their website. It's just, once you get kind of labeled as advocating for domestic violence or violence against women, that's not going to end well for you, right? But what interests me the most about this story isn't the commercial itself or the backlash that has happened. It's pretty predictable once you have backlash of that sort that's so loud that you're going to act. But the more interesting thing to me is what led to even thinking that would pass in the first place. And to me, it speaks to this kind of frat bro culture that we have in society now. And I think that you can kind of chart the way that a lot of men act to them thinking this is okay. And for the record, people are reporting on this and they're talking about how it's been removed and the products have been removed and all that. And a lot of the sentiment online, especially on X, from a lot of men and male golfers is that this is a step too far. We're policing too much. You got rid of the ad, bad ad, cool, but you'll need to do the further repercussions. But, companies are going to protect the PR, protect their brand, and that's what they've been doing. But for people to have issue with that, to say we're going too far on condemning a ad that seemingly promoted domestic violence is very indicative to me of where we're at today. And I want to talk about that, about where we are and how we got here a little bit, and really just why that matters. And I think it's important to kind of note here the stereotypes associated with golf. Golf for a very long time, to me, and this is kind of the reason I've never gotten into it, was it's been portrayed as this leisure activity of married, affluent white men. You even think about when Tiger Woods was on the scene, it was so unusual to have a dominant black golfer because we assumed all of our golfers that we would watch would look like Arnold Palmer or Jack Nicklaus, so that was kind of a shell shock, and for the longest time, it's really maintained that status. You think about the big golfers, they're all white guys, Rory McIlroy, Phil Mickelson, there've been blips, and like Callaway themselves, how they sponsored Michelle Wie for a while back in 2017. And so there is this inherent kind of white man coded thing about golf. It's very expensive to play, of course, country clubs and all those, everything about it is very good old boy white guy coded. Even like you think about like the Masters, the way just the whole aura of it, it just feels, kind of like country club vibes, right? So that's kind of the first thing. But then you consider the fact that think about the stereotypes associated with golf. That I'm tired of dealing with my wife and my kids. I go to the range or I go to the course for a few hours and, get away from all that. Yeah, there was kind of the foundation of the absentee husband, the stereotype on TV husband, right? Gets done from work and he has dinner, whatever, and he just can't bear to be by his family, so he has to go, shoot 18, right? So that is the inherent kind of stereotype and bias type issue within golf right from the jump, right? And so the sport itself has a negative perception amongst minorities and women for that reason. So it shouldn't really surprise you that a lot of suspect kind of messaging has come out because of golf and in like the golf community. Like I saw a TikTok creator was sharing videos where they they said that they're comparing golf to raping a woman and like which one is better, it's just a very perverse kind of idea. And a lot of these people, they kind of have fallen into this misogyny kind of vortex, who also happen to like golf. It doesn't help that like a lot of like the great country clubs are kind of in the South, and then and that kind of also lends itself to appealing to that sort of a demographic. And what we're at though right now is I feel like when Trump was elected in 2016, a lot of the reasons that he was elected to me was that he was the champion for a group of people, white men, straight white men, I should say, who felt incredibly underrepresented. They felt like, all right, we had to make space for all these minorities, whether it's black people, Asian people, Hispanic people, whatever. And we had to make more room for women in spaces. And, and they never were able to be fully represented, they thought, right? That was kind of the inside brain thoughts that they were having that no one would go out and say because, politicians were always like, well, we have to treat everybody equal, give her an opportunity, saying the right things. But then Trump comes along and he says, well, actually, no, you don't need that, and, white men, quote unquote, red-blooded American men, I am here, I am your champion, right? And they bought that hook, line, and sinker, right? And since then, there's been this domino effect, of men who, quite frankly, hate women. Like you hear so much of conversation online about like the male loneliness epidemic and how men are handling approaching dating online, right? That, women are kind of just the enemy now and it kind of has created this whole new wave of incels and just guys who just don't get it, and what that creates is this you've surrounded yourself in a bubble. And that bubble is you're in this internet content vortex that is telling you that, hey, all of these all of these people that have been telling you you need to treat women this way or that way, though they're wrong. You just have these male instincts that you need to tap into. And that is kind of what's led to the rise of the manosphere, and your Andrew Tates or whatever trying to tell you you gotta be this hyper masculine quote unquote alpha male or whatever, and that you shouldn't even try to look at a woman as an equal, right? That is the messaging that's going on throughout social media. The documentary by Louis Theroux in Into the Manosphere on Netflix really kind of peels back the curtain on that, as these guys who they're getting views, are appealing to younger men, and these younger men are increasingly hostile towards women. So when that becomes the social media diet of so many younger men, and we've seen it in the way the political ideology has shifted. Younger women are increasingly moving towards the left, younger men increasingly towards the right, more so than any other generation in the past. And that shift, that alignment, and the fact that social media can be an echo chamber has led to this idea of this aggressively hyper masculine male. And it's led to fewer men wanting to get educated and go to college. It's led to, proliferation of podcasts like Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn, those sort of guys. And so when that is the atmosphere that you're operating within, it's only natural, or maybe not natural, it's expected almost, that those guys are just going to descend into these violent spheres and think it is funny. Because consider that commercial. While, some people might tell you, well, it's harmless, no big deal, yada, yada, yada. Consider it from the perspective of somebody who's been fed all this manosphere content over the last few years, since like 2020. You are watching content, live streams, creators that you follow, everything is telling you how garbage women can be. And you also have seen the proliferation of trad wife content, and you are being a little bit indoctrinated into the idea that so much of this is because of the absence of gender roles, right? So you see on this commercial a woman doing what you associate to be a man's activity, playing golf, right? And she goes to grab this driver. That, to you, a person of this mind state, is a woman trying to take more from your domain. And the guy who's the co-owner of the company Good is just bum rushing her and tackling her. And for you, you're probably looking at this like, yeah, take the power back. But it's so destructive because, well, one, it's violent, right? So that goes out without saying. But it also is perpetuating this thing that we are more divided. The gender wars thing is just, it's more divided than it has ever been. And you have a company that's saying this is actually a good thing, assert your masculinity. And you just have to wonder how long these sort of companies can go on like this. And we've seen this in other arenas too. We see it in the WNBA. These men kind of coming in like Enes Kanter, trying to antagonize women because there has been this shift in the conservative American ideology of desiring a woman that looks and acts a certain way. So a woman with her own career, a woman that doesn't conform to typical standards of beauty, i.e. WNBA players. And, they're physically built stronger, and a lot of them are more mask presenting, and that irritates these people. So what do? They try to diminish them, throw dildos on the floor. And all of this is kind of connected, right? You look into like Project 2025, and what they want is, obviously elimination of anything trans, right? That's a very big deal in that ideology, in that document. They also want to have reduce the hiring practices of equity, and they also want to return to more traditional gender roles. And we've seen some people advocate for the erasure of women's sports into more, women interest topics like yoga and cheerleading or something, right? And that is just the slippery slope of a lot of these men in power saying, we've ceded too much. We got to take it back. And so you may look at this Callaway thing as just a bad PR marketing decision, but think of it in this sense. A group of people in marketing and ad copy and all that, they had to approve this. They had to see the script, watch the commercial, and say, yep, looks good, right? And, Callaway and Good can apologize to their blue in the face. You still saw the commercial where a guy tackled a woman and said, that's fine. Now, on the flip side, you could also suggest that they maybe wanted it out this way, that controversy sells. Now, obviously, that's backfired tremendously for Good because they're getting all their stuff pulled. But you don't okay something like this if ideologically, fundamentally, and foundationally, you don't feel something in alignment with that messaging. And it's kind of like a lot of this, like the whole edgelord humor stuff, like Elon Musk engages in this all. It's like, well, they're trying to police comedy. Like, no, they're just trying to police racist and sexist comedy. Okay, like you could still be funny without belittling people, and that's what this commercial did. It again, you could look at it as just this whatever stupid mistake of a commercial, but it is basically telling you, no, women don't belong on the golf course. And if you're on the golf course, I'm going to do something about it. And it reminds me a lot of women sports fans. The amount of times I've interviewed women on my podcast about this. I've talked to them in private and public about this, where they're tested to make sure that they're qualified to be a sports fan. Like recently, Sportico was at a New York Liberty game and was asking a lot of these people who were protesting for or against trans rights to name, 5 women basketball players. And it's the mechanism of the dude bro trying to show the girl like, oh, you're just a woman, you don't know ball, right? And, just like testing women to see how much they know about a sport or whatever is just like a classic gaslight maneuver. And like, what I never understood about that is if I go out with someone and they tell me that they're into football or basketball or whatever, now and for me, I'm just like, that's awesome, right? Because, I watch a lot of sports. This is something we could bond over, right? And, but a lot of other men will take this as a challenge. And I think that's the core of the issue. This is my thing, right? You're all up in my thing. You're trying to get involved. You're trying to impeach on my domain. This is the only thing I have left, right? They look at careers and interests and different things that they used to assume was just for the guys, so to speak. You go to like sports bars or just regular bars, it's like, it's a good mix. You go into different types of music, it's kind of incorporated. It's a good mix. And for so many of them, I think they felt like women were impeding on their right to enjoy sports when in reality they're just trying to enjoy sports. They don't really care about you. And I feel like these men are just so weak that they want to have some dominion, right? When it's just an interest. There shouldn't be a dominion. There shouldn't be a gendered dominion there. And I think that all of that kind of combined into one is why a commercial like this gets made, which is why I think it won't be the last commercial like this being made, because this is a mentality that, like, oh, silly women don't know anything about sports. This is a mentality that pervades, and I think that so many of these types of men, they want to exclude women. They don't want, because they don't see them as equals, and they never have seen them as equals, and they're being fed all this content to reinforce that belief. And I'm left to wonder about the future. Like, what is this what does this look like moving forward, right? Is the continued separation just inevitable? And then, because you have a lot of women who just hate men and a lot of men who hate women. And I just wonder, like, there has to be some sort of unifier, right? That kind of brings them back together. I mean, ironically, you could argue that a hatred of AI could be that thing because nothing seems to unite both political parties in the US than than the hatred of data centers and AI. But there has to be a meeting of minds of some sort. You can't go about promoting violence against women, and you can't go about just saying that every woman is out to get you or whatever. And there's bad apples on both sides of the bunch, right? And I look at this commercial as a microcosm of what's wrong with us right now, where we are just so embraced and entrenched in this sort of gender war that that's all we're seeing. And it's just like, you're either with me or against me type of thing, right? And I wish I had an answer about how you fix it. I don't really know if there is one, but I think that this is more than just a commercial. It's an ideological shift, right? This is an ideological shift of people who believe that they should have the power and want to quote unquote take the power back. And we should, the good being kind of rake through the coals here is ultimately to me a good thing because it shows that you can't just do this and get away with it. Even though you could argue that companies and people have been belittling women for decades and be getting away with it. So I think it's good that these guys got a little bit of get back, at least this one time. All right, everyone, that's going to wrap it up for another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a follow on your favorite podcast app of choice. You could also catch all of my written pieces on deepcoversports.com. I have a couple new pieces, a new piece about Sydney Taylor of the Chicago Sky, that's up, a piece about Russell Westbrook and, looking back at his career, and I have another one about social media that's coming up later this week. So make sure to check that out. Make sure to check out the podcast. Until next time, this has been the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zahran.